Hello, my name is Elaine Kiley, and I'm going to be taking you through a session on competencies now for the next kind of 20 minutes or so. And this is part of the professional development module for PhDs. So just a quick overview of what we're going to look at. So we're going to say, what are competencies? Excuse me, I should have put on my glasses before I started. How you can assess your own competencies, and how, I suppose, how you can talk about and write about your competencies. So they're the kind of three broad kind of areas that we'll cover in the next 20 minutes or so. Just as a precursor to that, I suppose, to remind you that you will often hear people use the term skills, particularly like employability skills or transferable skills or even translatable skills. And oftentimes when they're using these terms, they mean competency. Competency is a little bit different than a skill, and we're going to look at that now for a moment. But if I were to just even ask you to reflect before I move on to the next slide, what do you think is the difference between a skill and a competency? Because it's something that is important to note when you're thinking about your own competencies. So the difference is, I suppose, if I put it down to the difference between what and how. So a skill is your capacity, your learned capacity to carry out predetermined results. So I've given the examples there of driving a car, writing a conference paper, analyzing qualitative or quantitative data, performing brain surgery. So obviously skills will vary in complexity, as you can see from that list. So skill, as I said, tells you what a person can do, what the abilities a person needs to perform a specific activity. A competency then tells you how you do that job or you do that skill. So it adds another dimension to it. And that, I suppose, possibly a simple way to look at that, or an easy-ish way to look at, is to think of it in kind of three constituent parts. So a competency, it incorporates your knowledge, skills, and attitude, so your capabilities, plus your behaviors, so your actions, thoughts, and feelings, plus outputs to give a result, so the product and service, and that gives you the result. So a competency is more than just the knowledge, skills, and attitude that you'd need in terms of delivering a skill. It is also the actions, thoughts, and feelings, and the products and services as the output. And I think it's good to think of it in this way because, say for example, the driving a car, the skill of driving a car, how competent someone is will differ. You versus me driving a car, we may have a different level of competency. But even if you were to think of it in career terms, the competency of a driving instructor will be different to the competency you would expect from a Formula One driver. And they both have the knowledge in terms of driving the car and the skills to do so, but the behaviors and the services and products that they're engaged in will differ quite a lot. And so it can be good then to think about competency both in the context of having an example like the driving a car in the back of your mind as a relatable kind of example to have, but also when you're thinking about your own competencies, to be sure that you don't start to kind of compare yourself to someone who is, at a way different level than you in terms of their ability. So in other words, compare yourself to your peer. Sometimes maybe it could be that you start comparing yourself to your supervisor or your supervisory panel, and really, given the level of experience and time that they're engaged in the same area or research area as you, how fair is it to kind of start comparing yourself to them? Equally, you want to ensure that you don't, underrepresent your competency in a given area. So just bear that in mind when you're thinking in terms of your competencies. And the other thing that I'd like to say about competency at this point is that, when we're looking at competencies now together, because there's a group, of us from across all different faculties, there are a series of competencies that everyone will have to engage in or demonstrate or develop throughout the course of their work life. And these often we call, life skills or general competencies. There are, in addition, then functional or technical competencies. And interestingly, that's similar to, the career anchors definition in terms of that technical functional competence. And those are the competencies that will be very specific to your area of expertise. So whether that's around, database, use of like kind of processes, type of methodology that you're using, your own research area. So those will be your technical functional competencies, and they will be something that will be an essential criteria for many roles that you're going into. But really what we're going to focus on are those competencies that that are needed for life and that you will come across in all areas. And this is where the transferable element comes from, because the whole notion is that you develop a competency like communication in one area, you can translate it into another. But it is, first of all, identifying that you have these competencies, and then being able to kind of talk about them and tell a story about them. But let's first get to how we identify them. So as part of that identification, what I'm going to ask you to do now is, if you want to pause at this slide after you've just had a read of it, and make a note of the activity I'm asking you to do, which is just to take a couple of minutes to list some of the activities that you have completed or achievements that you have gained since you've started your PhD. So that could be the different types of research methods you're using, or data analytics tools you're using, publications or presentations, poster presentations, conference presentations, the thesis in 3 presentation. So anything like that that you have done since you started your PhD, maybe classes or modules that you have delivered, or labs that you have been involved in delivering, or maybe indeed organizing and participating in events. So if you're involved in Science Week on campus, or if you've done a talk as part of Engineers Ireland, or if you've gone back to your secondary school and you've talked to students there in their final year about undergraduate programs that they may choose. So just list all of like kind of those, or at least not all, some of those activities that you have completed and gained from your PhD. Take a few minutes to jot those down, and keep this, then we'll use it again later on in the slides for the second reflection. So why do we need to know competencies? So we've talked about the what of competencies and the fact that they kind of translate. And I suppose that's the important thing in terms of knowing about competencies. So all of you are involved in doing research postgraduate program, and you'll see I've just put in a quote there at the bottom of the slide. And I suppose it's timely maybe to mention this now, in that, the PhD originally was known as like kind of an apprenticeship style program. So you engaged in a PhD under the tutelage of a supervisor whose knowledge was far superior to yours, with the objective of you, through that apprenticeship period, gaining to the same level, achieving that same status and that same level of expertise, and contributing to original research. And then the idea being that like kind of you would move into a similar role as the academic. So very much like kind of the PhD was seen as a model of an apprenticeship for academia. In the past, I mean, not even 20 years, in the past 15 years, there's been a huge increase in the number of candidates in Ireland and across the world that have started to engage in PhDs. In fact, there's a figure there that says that there's 99% increase since 2006 in the number of PhD candidates going through the system in Ireland. And you all know from the way that the system works and being in the system that there isn't a 99% increase in the number of academics that are working within higher education. So there is definitely a huge move to increase the number of PhD graduates that we have in the country, and that's like kind of fulfilling our objectives, like kind of in relation to the knowledge economy. But equally, there are not the same number of academic roles or academic and research roles available to those graduates. So as a very natural I suppose, output of that, it means that many PhDs will not be able to stay in academia. And in fact, the figures show that, between 20 and 30% of those that complete PhDs will remain within academia, will be able to get a permanent post within academia. And so that very much is the change of the PhD as a product to the PhD as a process. And so it's a training in the competencies to become a knowledge worker fitting the needs of the global market. And those competencies are the things that we want to focus on now and think about how is what I'm doing and the skills I'm learning and how I'm developing those within my PhD, how can I kind of use that in looking for jobs or developing my career either within academia or outside of academia, because even though, as I said, there's a huge increase in the number of PhDs, and obviously they will have to move outside of academia, there aren't the roles for them within HE. Even within HE, you still need to be able to demonstrate all of the competencies that would be expected of you in industry, albeit maybe with more of an academic kind of focus on them. So this is why competencies are important for staying within academia, for moving outside of academia. If you're talking about changing your career focus, so you may have come into your PhD having worked for a number of years in a particular field, and now you're changing focus. So it's to think about how you can use your past experience along with your current, if you've been out of the workforce and are re-entering it, and also, as I said, to enhance like kind of the skills that you're gaining and developing through your academic research. In terms of then that whole issue of transferability and translatability, I suppose as a simple example, you might find that someone will say, I have X number of peer-reviewed publications. And so the transfer of that is thinking about another way that you could say that. So what is that? That's experience of writing. But if you're talking about going into a role outside of, the academic sector where and again, in reality, this second example, you will need to be able to demonstrate within academia, but in academia, peer-reviewed publications are very important. But if, for example, we just look at the kind of the other way of stating this, it might be around your experience in writing for diverse audiences, which includes publishing, writing lectures, and delivering reports. So again, different styles of writing depending on which body kind of is receiving that information. So it's about kind of taking, I suppose, something that's kind of very familiar and you're aware of, and just kind of thinking, how can I adapt how I'm saying this, or who am I writing this for? And that can often help. So who's my audience? And again, you're all very aware and familiar with that in terms of your conference presentations already. You consistently write for kind of your audience. Now it's just thinking outside of academia in relation to your audience. So if your audience is the employer, what are they looking for when they say they want someone who's got good writing skills? What does that mean for them? Is it report writing? Is it funding? Is it proposals? Is it kind of contributing to research? Is it through research and patent applications? Is it through kind of delivery of training? Is it being able to write for a client audience versus a supplier audience? So just to think who you are kind of putting that together for. And really, I suppose the other truth in kind of this aspect of competencies is that it just requires time. So it is about kind of, okay, identifying what they are, those competencies that are important to you and to everyone, and then thinking about your own scenario and your own situation and taking the time. And it's kind of really the hard graft. And again, that's nothing that you are not kind of familiar with on an everyday basis. The getting in and the engaging kind of in the hard work that's involved in kind of the process to get to the product. And so it is about kind of that I suppose taking the time to develop this skill set. It's another skill really that you are going to develop, another competency in fact. So from the employer mindset, I suppose, particularly if we're looking now outside of academia, many employers working with PhDs will be new to them. And they may have assumptions around kind of what it is to have a PhD or to have spent time within kind of research. And actually something for you to reflect on is, what do you think the assumptions might be for employers that you might be interested in approaching? And then thinking about how do you address those. So that's something that, even we can have a conversation when we meet for the small group work, that will be like kind of integral to our conversation around competencies. What is it that the employers in my industry assume about PhDs, and what is it that they look for from PhDs, or indeed from any graduate? And so you're thinking about that and like kind of addressing that question, or those two questions, and thinking about the competencies that the employers in your sector are looking for, that allows you to kind of show the employer and demonstrate to the employer and give them evidence that you have the skill set and the competencies that relate to their industry and their sector. And employers, from what they want, I mean, if you look at if you actually even start to look at like kind of job descriptions, regardless of what the role is for, you will see that employers love leadership skills. They love people who can manage projects. They love people who get along with each other, people who work as part of a team as well as independently, people who can work on their own initiative, people who write well, who meet deadlines, who are critical thinkers. And all of those aspects you have, that is you. You can give evidence and examples of every single one of those skills just through your research, like kind of alone. That's aside from thinking about your past experience or any extracurricular activities that you're engaged in. So again, it's about taking the time to think through those and think about how you demonstrate. So other ways, and I said, all of those examples there around leadership and teamwork and initiative, you can think about those in the context of your PhD, but equally you can look outside of your PhD for examples. So it might be previous jobs, your volunteer work, your hobbies. Another way to identify your competencies, or at least the competencies that are going to be important for you in the job market, is, like I said, to start like kind of researching job descriptions. So start to sign up to some sites or sectors that will advertise roles that are of interest to you, and look at the competencies or the qualities that employers are looking for, and then assess yourself and audit yourself in terms of having those qualities. And there are a couple of different tools that are very useful to help you if you're completing that self-audit. So I've listed them down here, but actually you can't possibly see because the video is oversetting it. I have more detail here on this slide. So you have the Irish Universities Association, and they developed a PhD graduate skill statement. So again, you could look at those statements and kind of reflect yourself against those statements. Say, have I got that skill, or have I got that, have I got that skill, and to what level? So the how being the competency, the level gives you the sense of competency around it. The VTI Research Development Framework is an excellent model. It's huge. There's like kind of over 63 discrete aspects that you can look at for that. And you can sign into the VTI website using your UL address. I'm exploring as to whether you can download the research framework for free as part of that subscription that UL has, or it may be that you have to pay for it if you want to go into the online RDF planner. But even aside from that, even seeing that like kind of RDF wheel is very useful in terms of thinking about auditing your own skills and competencies. But even if we look more locally, the HR website has an excellent, in their policy section, they have an excellent behavioral competency framework that you could use, and definitely one that's like kind of worth looking at. It goes through all of the competencies that you're expected to demonstrate if you're working within academia in UL in this instance, and talks about the different levels. And then finally, the last two, like sites like jobs.ac.uk, are very good for example, around competencies for collaboration. Again, that's interesting. That's something that like kind of often comes up, that PhD graduates don't have teamwork skills, but actually, you collaborate all the time, and it's just thinking about those collaborations. You may not be in formal functional teams, but you are like kind of in very collaborative work all the time. And then the likes of graduate market surveys. So, we produce those by contacting employers and saying, what are the kind of skills and competencies that you're looking for year on year from graduates? So there are all sources that you could look at in terms of doing your own audit of your competencies. Um, I suppose the how is the next bit. So I'm suggesting that there's kind of two ways that you can look at auditing or exploring your own competencies. So you can go the route which is specific to general, and that ties back in with the activity that I asked you to do at the beginning of this video, which was around listing some of the activities or achievements from your PhD. So I've given an example of an achievement or activity here, which is working as a teaching assistant. And so if I'm using that activity as a way to determine, okay, what are the competencies associated with that, the next step that I might look at are the behaviors. So if you remember, the behaviors are very important in terms of, so it's the knowledge, skills, and attitude plus the behaviors and actions. So if I think in terms of the behaviors that are associated with being a teaching assistant or a tutor, it's preparing lectures, researching and gathering information, actually teaching class sizes, whatever the size of the class is, assessing grading exams, answering queries. And then it's around like kind of mapping the competencies onto that. So the competencies or skills I'm demonstrating are organizational, planning and scheduling, communication, explaining difficult concepts, diplomacy and conflict management. So there's one way to like kind of think about how do I like kind of, I suppose, draw out my competencies from the activities that I'm engaged in. The other way that you can do it then is from the general to the specific. So if, for example, you're looking at job descriptions and you see that an employer is saying they want teamwork and communication and initiative and leadership. So then you start with like kind of the competency that they're looking for, and you think, okay, in the context of the role that I'm applying for, what does teamwork mean? So, generally it means to work collaboratively with others, but you might have a more of a or a different definition depending on like kind of the role that you're applying for. And then it's to kind of go back in and think of the behaviors that are associated with teamwork. So what are the behaviors to a high standard that are associated with me being part of a team or working as part of a team? So helping and supporting colleagues, doing my fair share of work, taking on work willingly, trying to do different tasks that would like kind of benefit the work of the team, accepting feedback that I may receive from others, understanding the impact of my actions and sharing information. And then thinking about, okay, if I were to take those behaviors, where is a time that I have? So where is an activity or an achievement that I have demonstrated that shows my example of teamwork? So it might be your research project team that you're involved in, your co-op work experience team, or clubs and societies that you're engaged in. So those two methods are for you to use maybe on now activity 2, which is to take one of the activities that you noted in the reflection at the beginning and use, I'd suggest both. So use the specific to general route, which is the tasks to competencies route, and think about the competencies that you've demonstrated in that activity. Or go the opposite direction and use the competencies to evidence route. And so that's going from the general to the specific. Take a competency and think about the behaviors associated with it and give your specific example. So I think that would be very useful as a starting point to get you thinking, because when we meet online, the idea is that we'll do like kind of some work in a group, because sometimes it's very good to reflect and do it by ourselves, but sometimes we get more insight and we get more ideas like kind of in working in small groups. And so that's the plan for the next step, is to do some small group work together to further explore your competencies. And I look forward to meeting you for that. And thank you very much.